Hello, welcome to the Hormone Genius Podcast. I'm here with my awesome co-host, Jamie, and we're going to talk about something incredibly basic. It's the thing that we talk about all the time. It's ovulation, but we're going to take a spin on ovulation as the main event, but also a main contributor to your health. We don't often realize that natural ovulation is healthy to women. And there are a lot of natural ovulators out there, but there have been, in some ways, a pressure and a push to stop ovulation. And we know this through birth control pills because they suppress ovulation. And we also know there's periods of time in a woman's life when she just doesn't ovulate. That can be when she's pregnant. That can be when she's postpartum. That can be when she's in puberty, heading towards having periods, and it can be in perimenopause and after menopause, that ovulation can somewhat disappear. So we'll use those examples to kind of dive into what is it that makes ovulation healthy from a hormonal perspective, and why maybe all of us should consider more strongly the benefits of ovulation to our individual health. Jamie, I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, Teresa, this is so important because in our very first season, we had an episode called Ovulation, the Main Event. And that is an incredible episode. And so for those of you who need to brush up on the cycle, I encourage you to check out season 1 and you check out that episode specifically. But I know when Teresa and I were planning this episode, I was wondering what's going to be the difference between this episode and that episode. And I like what you told me, Teresa. The main focus of this is just to share that ovulation is a marker of health. It's more than just fertility. It's more than just fertility. It's like, again, we think about vital signs of health. If we're not ovulating, then that means that there's something happening upriver. Like the lack of ovulation is the downriver symptom of an issue. And so that's why it's important for our listeners and for you and I, Teresa, and the medical community and the research community to continually study and focus and find solutions for women who aren't ovulating. And they want to, obviously, we want to be ovulating. And again, we're talking about the women who are not taking hormonal contraception, but we will talk about how hormonal contraception does impact our health and ovulation, I'm sure, in this episode as well. So I'm excited, Teresa.
So estrogen, Jamie, we know estrogen, big time hormone. And we were talking offline that sometimes we focus a lot more on estrogen than we do on progesterone, but we're going to have an equal balance of focusing on both of those hormones today, because we want you to know that that is kind of the point. Like, ovulation is this complex, interactive, dynamic ups and downs of these two ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And without the balance, there is something that's going to be missing for the body, in a sense. The more and more I learn about hormones, Jamie, the more I realize how intricate this entire symphony of hormones that we have is, and how important it is to have the balance of all of these hormones in order for it to really work well in the body. So if we talk about estrogen, Jamie, this is the hormone that's more dominant through all of the menstrual cycle, right? So we have estrogen being made both in the follicular phase, which is pre-ovulation, and both in the post-ovulation phase or the luteal phase. So estrogen is more dominant all throughout, and it has very particular effects on all parts of the body. Like they, will say there's estrogen receptors pretty much in every tissue in the body, every tissue. And there's different receptor types for estrogen. There's different, there's alpha receptors and there's beta receptors. There's even different types of estrogens. In fact, there's 4 estrogens. We think of 3 estrogens: estradiol, estrone, and estriol. There's even a 4th estrogen called fetal estrogen, but nobody really talks about that one. So, there's all this information around estrogen, but we're going to kind of focus on the basics because we're not going to go too deep into the science of it, but what we want to know is that estrogen helps with our brain, our bones, and our heart, particularly. It helps a cajillion other things as well, but what we have the most research on is the brain, the bones, and the cardiovascular system. So let's start with the heart, Jamie, because what we know about estrogen in the heart is that really estrogen makes the heart dynamically smooth. It makes the smooth muscles work better. We know that it protects the endothelial lining of the heart, which is like where the inner side of the heart vessels, like it's this very, very dynamic kind of layer of the heart where if damage occurs, it's where we build up plaque as well. And estrogen protects against that. So as women have this estrogen throughout their body, they're actually getting protection from heart disease all throughout their life until they lose estrogen. And this is what we know when women go into menopause.
Yeah. Well, I'm just nodding my head as I'm listening to you because the number of times, Teresa, I've met with women, and I'm sure the number of times you've met with women, and they come to me and they say, I just feel like something's off. I'm not having regular periods, and I maybe only have 4 or 5 in the year, but I'm not trying to get pregnant. And so my doctor says it's fine. Just kind of let be what's happening. No worries. No need to worry. And I just cringe every single time because it's almost like thinking about, every time you have a healthy ovulation, that is it's protecting, like it's a protectant every time you have a healthy ovulation. And so if we're not having healthy ovulations around every month, typical or normals between 24 and 36 days, then that is not healthy. It's not healthy. But the medical community doesn't see it in that way at all. And so it's just interesting that women who do ovulate on a regular basis have lower risk of heart disease because, like you're saying, the estrogen, and I was just looking this up, but the estrogen, it lowers LDL cholesterol, which is the bad cholesterol, and it increases HDL cholesterol, which is the good cholesterol, which again is a protectant against, the atherosclerosis is how you say that. So again, thinking about as many times as I can ovulate in a healthy way, it is really investing in my heart health. And so it's very important for women to take this seriously. And they even did a study in the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. It showed that women with regular menstrual cycles and therefore regular ovulation, they tended to have healthier cholesterol profiles and then a reduced risk of heart disease, obviously, compared to women who didn't regularly ovulate or who were on birth control. So frustrating. Why do we not talk about this more? So frustrating.
Right. And you bring up a really good point about regular ovulation, Jamie. And even within that, like we can have women, especially now, just in a very toxic world, that are looking like they're ovulating normally, but maybe they're not. So they call this like I think it's like sub-ovulatory dysregulation or some sort of like it's ovulation, but the hormones aren't balanced right, and we'll get into that, I think, a little bit more. But, one example, Jamie, right off the bat that made me think of what you're talking about with heart health and ovulation is the opposite, in a sense, is the disease called polycystic ovarian syndrome, like where you don't ovulate and you don't get the balance of estrogen and progesterone, and it causes a metabolic issue, right?
Yeah.
So it causes our bodies to be less insulin sensitive. We're not releasing that progesterone, which is balancing to the estrogen. And so that is a situation where women, are not getting always adequate treatment. And to understand that PCOS, that disease, is a risk for cardio metabolic disorders later in life, and how the real reason why it's occurring is in some sense due to the lack of ovulation.
Yeah.
So polycystic ovarian syndrome is something, if you have that, understanding kind of what is going on and understanding that the real root of not having periods is not ovulating. And so if you've missed your period for 3 months, 6 months, a year, what you should really be thinking is, oh, I'm not ovulating and I'm missing that thing that is a healthy, vital sign to me as a woman.
Right. Yeah, it's so true. And I just think it's interesting how, again, how incredibly our body has been made in that we're more insulin sensitive before ovulation. Therefore, we need the energy for healthy ovulation and our cells are more receptive. We're more insulin resistant. And it's just, again, a very interesting thing, but ovulation needs to have happened. And again, there is this idea of also being aware of, what we're consuming and how we're eating. But even just knowing that is the way our body works, it helps us eat in sync and in tune with our cycle. You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
mean, again, we were talking, Teresa and I, about how with progesterone after ovulation, you need about 300 more calories because of, again, the energy requirements of progesterone. It's a lot harder for your body to produce enough estrogen, again, to keep the estrogen progesterone level at the right ratio. But the only way that happens is if you have healthy ovulation. If you have a bunk ovulation, and if your follicle is not a strong follicle, then that corpus luteum is going to be a weak bunk corpus luteum. By the way, I don't know if I've ever used bunk to
No,
describe anything. I don't even know if I'm using that in the right
it
way.
makes me laugh. I like it. Bunk ovulation. I'm not sure what it means, but it's
Don't
funny.
look in Urban Dictionary. It probably has something.
Yeah, right. Well, that's good. So a couple other things that tells us that estrogen is so good for the heart, Jamie, is that we know that women who have early hysterectomies or have premature ovarian loss or premature ovarian failure, they have a higher risk of heart disease. So
Mm.
it's more evidence to, again, the protection of estrogen to the heart. The other thing we know is that in menopause, of course, men and women are different at 50. Like men have a higher risk of heart disease at 50 than women do. But within 10 years of menopause, women equal heart disease risk to men. And that is because those 10 years for many, many women, particularly those who didn't get hormone replacement therapy, have such less estrogen. They're not
Yeah.
getting that protection anymore to the heart.
Hmm.
So it's just, again, what we want to say here is that estrogen is healthy to the heart and estrogen comes from healthy ovulation. And
Right.
so we want to be, as much as we can, see that that is a beautiful sign of our body being healthy, watching that vital sign. And we know that the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2015 declared the menstrual cycle a vital sign of health that should be measured, just
Mhm.
like you measure your blood pressure or your heart rate or your
Right.
respirations.
Hmm.
That the periods, the way women can see periods and track them, is a vital sign of health, but that is representative, of course, of an ovulatory cycle.
Right. Right. And if your doctors are saying, it's okay that you're not ovulating every month, you're not trying to get pregnant, well, remind him, ovulation has is important, of course, for pregnancy, conception, and fertility, but there's more to it than that. There is more to it. So if your medical professional, your doctor, your healthcare team, they don't understand that, I encourage you to interview other doctors because, again, a lot of doctors do know this and many doctors don't. So it's not to say that every medical person has this thought. That's just not the case. People like Teresa and many more out there do understand this. Okay, let's talk about now bone health and then the estrogen and progesterone's role in this. I remember when I ran track at UNI, there was a friend of mine who's super, super, super skinny. She was just lean and she wasn't getting her periods and she was at risk, of course, later on for osteoporosis, but her bones, her doctors diagnosed her with osteopenia, which is softening of the bones. Okay. So she doesn't get her period. She has softening of the bone. And they said she needs to be on birth control. She needs to be on birth control. She came to us at practice and said, I don't want to be on birth control. But the doctor's telling me this is my only option to protect my bones is to be on birth control. And I remember it was this big heart thing in her mind, in her heart and in her mind. She was just in so much angst about this decision. She went back to the doctor and said, I don't want to be on birth control for this. Is there something else? And guess what? They gave her another alternative, like very easily and quickly. They just said,
Wow.
like, just boost your vitamin D and your calcium. And they gave her these supplements, eat more healthy fats. Why did it take her just in turmoil with their number one go-to of being on the pill? And then she could have said, okay, put me on the pill. But no, she didn't want to. And she asked, well, what's line two? Like, what's my second option? And the second option was let's include healthier fats in your diet and then let's take some supplements. And guess what, Teresa? She was fine. Like, I think a year
Yeah.
later, she got tested again and she was fine.
Wow. Yeah,
Crazy.
it's such a good story, Jamie, to tell. Because again, if you're listening and you've been to a doctor and you felt that kind of like, here it comes, they're going to offer the pill, but you were not wanting it to begin with.
Mm-mm.
And you're just like, what do I do? Well, maybe just say, hey, I really am not interested in that. And can you give me a line two,
Yeah.
an alternative? And sometimes you won't. Sometimes you'll get a doctor that says, I'm sorry, I don't have anything else to offer you, but maybe you
Mhm.
will. And
Yeah.
so we give, the respect to our doctors to say, hey, you're working on as a team player with me. Let's try to find a solution that works for both of us in a sense. Like this is what I want for my body too.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Well, Jamie,
Mhm.
that's a really good important thing to bring up about estrogen and the bones. And this will go into the other most common disorder that we see, and you're bringing it up with your friend, is hypothalamic amenorrhea caused by lean body mass, over exercising, nutrient deficiency sometimes. Common in high school, common in college age girls, but it is a concerning condition in the sense that what did they lose? They lost ovulation, but
Mhm.
unlike PCOS, so PCOS usually have normal estrogen levels, hypothalamic amenorrhea even decreases estrogen more because you don't have the body fat that goes with the need, the hormones that are produced from that. So this is a very important thing to understand. There is alternatives to using birth control in hypothalamic amenorrhea, not just calcium supplements and diet, but you can actually use natural hormones to support bones too. And
Yeah.
I often do this. So there are bioidentical hormones now that we can use. So you can ask your doctor about that. But estrogen plays a vital role in maintaining your bone density. When you go through puberty, it is literally like the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, that are helping your bones and the rest of your body grow. It is like a major signaling pathway.
Mhm.
All of our hormones are for growth. Without our normal hormones and without normal ovulation, our muscles and bones don't get the right and proper and natural hormone signaling that comes from estrogen and progesterone. And in fact, they know that, preliminary research is showing that girls who are particularly put on birth control pills early, like 13, 14, 15, 16, and
Mhm.
stay on them throughout adolescence, they are not reaching their peak bone mass because those hormones, which again suppress the natural ovulation, are not allowing the signaling, the proper signaling at the receptor sites and in the bone level. We call them the osteoblasts, which build the bone, and the osteoclasts, which break down the bone. And that's an intricate kind of balance again, but they're not getting those natural hormones that signal that. So it is something like, again, mothers don't want their daughters necessarily to be on synthetic hormones, but they're not being given the alternative. But a question to ask your doctor
Yeah.
is, what impact could this have on her bone development? And we know definitely by research, Jamie, that what we call crappy hormones or crappy progestins, medroxyprogesterone and Depo-Provera, which is an injection, definitely lower bone
Yeah.
density. So those synthetic hormones are not good for bone density. So it's just really, again, what do we know? What is informed consent here about these things?
Yeah.
And can we ask more questions? Can we do more research too in this
Mm.
area?
Totally. And I think too about as we age, we're making an investment too in our bone health by ovulating before we go through menopause. Because if our bones are weakened before we go through menopause because we don't have enough estrogen and we don't have enough progesterone and then we go through menopause, we're starting already at an uphill battle. Like it's already a difficult adjustment getting to menopause and having to manage through all those hormone changes. But to have also then weakened bones, well, what does that impact? Well, maybe it impacts your ability to, be stable, and it'll impact, of course, your health as you age even beyond 50s. You hear all the time about people breaking their hips and how it's very hard for them to recover from that because, again, their bones aren't as healthy. So that's something I want to encourage all young women in your 20s, 30s, or whoever's listening to this. If you haven't gone through menopause, like truly, truly, of course, we want to have proper diets. We want to do load-bearing activities because building muscle mass also helps strengthen your bones, but so does ovulation. And speaking of strengthening bones, I'm going to transition to strengthening your body with our podcast sponsor. How did you like that for a transition, Teresa? Um, Teresa and I love We Heart Nutrition. We love, love, love their latest supplement called Wholesome Balance. Love that one. That's specifically geared for women who have hormone imbalance issues as manifested through PMS, mood swings, XYZ. So check out We Heart Nutrition. For those of you who are listening, you will get 20% off your supplements by using the code GENIUS at checkout. It'll be again 20% off. And if you're wondering what supplements you need, go to www.weheartnutrition.com and take a 20-second quiz, and it'll give you right then and there. You don't even have to think about it. It'll give you the top recommended supplements that may be best suited for you in your season of life. So, weheartnutrition.com, thank you so much for supporting us. And again, we love their supplements so, so much. So, thank you so much. All right. So, Teresa, talking about bone health, is there anything else we want to talk about in regards to bone health before we talk about brain?
Well, I
Brain
want to bring in what you mentioned, Jamie, which is muscle, because
muscle, yeah.
we know that they're connected deeply, like on all sorts of levels, right? We got to have the muscle that basically, again, signals the growth of the bone. And
Yep.
muscle mass is very important to keeping bone density throughout your life. But what we don't often talk about is how estrogen really is this beautiful hormone that is stimulating our muscle fibers. So
Mhm.
they call this kind of interaction between our satellite cells and myosin, which is this, protein that's causing like again, the kind of,
The junctions.
interactions that are
Yeah.
growing the muscle fibers. So estrogen is a stimulator of muscle mass and strength. It helps in post recovery. So, like when we exercise, there is always a micro damage that happens to the muscle, but that's a stimulus also to build. But estrogen allows us to recover much quicker from exercise. So, we often say this, right, Jamie? What's the best time to lift weights and kind of really go the
Mhm.
hardest? It's when
Yep.
you're in your follicular phase,
Mhm.
ovulatory phase, because that is when that estrogen is the highest. And it's going to be not only helping you grow that muscle, but recover from that workout as well.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important to know that because as busy moms or as busy women to get that workout in, you're really way more resilient. You really are in this follicular phase. Very resilient. So again, if you're trying to meet a goal, maybe you're lifting weights or you're running or whatever, that high intensity exercise is really when you do have permission to push it. Always listen to your body, obviously. Whereas there's really no other time like that in the cycle, Teresa, where we're really, in a sense, giving biological permission to push it. For those who maybe were past athletes or current athletes and who really just like a good sweat, that's just a good time to push it and then to be gentle with yourself the rest of the month for sure. For
And
sure.
then lastly, the last thing I want to say about muscle, and
Yeah.
we brought this up on another, I think it was the weightlifting podcast, which is again a great podcast. Go if you haven't listened to that one, Healthy Women Lift Heavy. We had a great interview for that one. But we brought up the fact that those who are not ovulating and are on synthetic hormones, they've done a study recently that came out in a sports journal that showed that they made 60% less muscle gains
Mhm.
when doing resistance training because they were on the birth control. Again,
Mhm.
they don't have those natural ovulatory hormones there. And that's probably, it's not the whole story. And it doesn't mean you can't make muscle when you're on birth control. But again, these are things that I think women are asking questions about, and they just want to know, what's the risk versus benefit of anything?
And I just keep thinking about the cascade effect that takes place when we throw a wrench in a natural cycle, like a natural cycle of life, like if, just in general, when I say cycle, but more specifically the fertility cycle, when we throw a wrench in a natural system, in a natural cycle, normally I say, when I say that, when you throw a wrench in a natural cycle, chaos can be the result, but chaos seems too strong right now to say, but just an outcome that you don't desire
Mm.
or an outcome you don't even realize is going to take place. So, for instance, if let's say we take the pill and we're not building muscle mass as much as we'd like, and let's say we are underweight, and now our bones really are in trouble because our that tension between the muscle pulls at the bone, and again, that's a bit about how it strengthens it. But even that alone, that's quite a bit, 60%,
Mhm.
and all these things working together, but then that cascade down the line. And the thing that makes me most frustrated about this, Teresa, is if a woman knew that was what was going to happen, and let's just say, okay, she's going to choose that and move on with her life and whatever. But women are not truly informed
Right.
about this at all. And that's what's frustrating, is we don't even know that's the choice we're making.
Right. Yeah, it is. And especially again, I just think of the younger women,
Yeah.
again, and the mothers that are trying to
Mhm.
help their daughters with these period issues, and they don't realize maybe some of these negative consequences. But also, again, I mean, and the point of this episode is like why our natural hormones are healthy, and you're going to take that away. And I think that's,
Mhm. Yeah.
the message we're trying to say is there more like, what are you losing
Yeah.
instead of what's being put in there? But what are you losing? You're losing our God-given endocrine system, a part of our body that is meant to help. And I think we haven't talked about how these hormones don't just affect ovaries.
Right.
There are receptor sites for hormones in every tissue in the body. Therefore, the consequences, as you said, Jamie, are enormous when you look at the cascading effects of anything related to an abnormal hormone process versus a
Hmm.
normal hormone process.
Hmm.
So let's talk about the brain, Jamie.
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
just, gosh, there's so much to talk about. I
Yeah.
mean, estrogen in the brain, and we haven't talked about progesterone, but estrogen in the brain, so important. We've talked about how it's related to memory, how it's related to emotions, the hippocampus, brain remodeling, and neural protection. And there's going to be an incredible balance between both estrogen and progesterone, but studies about estrogen tell us that estrogen is crucial for memory and spatial recognition, and that research around even cognitive decline with age would show that estrogen improves cognitive decline. And there's a lot of kind of talk about Alzheimer's and estrogen and whether hormone replacement therapy is good for women for their brain or not. But the overwhelming evidence, if you really look at, again, the natural hormones, natural estrogen, is that estrogen definitely improves brain health, and that women deserve to have this protection to their brain, because who wants to lose their ability to think and to
Hmm.
remember? And women in perimenopause and menopause know this well, right? Because Jamie, one of the main symptoms of losing estrogen is brain fog. And it's
Yeah.
very distressing to women. Probably one of the most distressing things that happens as a woman gets to 50 and they enter into the perimenopause, full menopause period, is this loss of cognitive ability. Like this, they used to be quick and on their feet with their brain, and I could remember people's names and remember where I put
Yeah.
things. And all of a sudden they feel like they turn to an 80-year-old brain. And
Hmm.
that is loss of ovulation,
Hmm.
right? And loss of estrogen and progesterone in the brain. Very significant, and
Hmm.
something we just do not have a full handle on in terms of what we do about that.
Yeah. And even the fact that women who have low estrogen and may not be ovulating before they're in menopause, how frustrating that can be, as they're trying to maybe climb the ladder in their work, or they're trying to teach a classroom of kids, or, keep track of their budget, or whatever the case is. It's just so, so frustrating. Something I just thought of, I have no idea if this has been proven, but I'm just putting two things together. Okay, so you know how with estrogen, our estrogen genius, or our follicular phase, as estrogen is increasing in the body, We become more inclined to speak well. So we can come up with better words, we speak more fluently, we can recognize facial expressions better, we have a higher emotional intelligence. So because that comes with increasing estrogen, and if we think of the opposite of increasing estrogen, but then also the opposite of those traits, and then I was thinking about dementia and Alzheimer's. I was just thinking, wow, that's so interesting that the antithesis or whatever of those things are really, well, not knowing facial expression or not having good recognition or not having as high of emotional intelligence or not being able to put words together, and how maybe time after time after time after time after time of those things of not having that estrogen, maybe it's a kind of compounding. Again, this is more theoretical, but it's just interesting because something I learned about estrogen is it supports the dendritic spine in the neurons. Like I think of dendrites and I think of like how they're not like a circular cell, but how, the more intact that is, then the healthier the, I should say,
Like the synapses, like
yeah, the synapses. That's what I'm trying to think.
like you're
Thank you.
getting the connections between your
Yes.
neurons, right? Like,
Thank you.
yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Hmm.
So yeah, so interesting with the brain. And I know with you personally, even you've mentioned before your mother has Alzheimer's, and how passionate I can imagine this passion project for you to make sure women know about how important this is.
Yeah, and obviously for my own self, like worrying
Right?
about kind of the genetic risk factors for
Mhm.
Alzheimer's and whether or not estrogen could help me.
Yeah.
And believe me, like I truly think it will, and I plan to be on estrogen in my hormone or past my menopause years, which again is a personal decision that every person should have with their doctor on the risks and benefits of any treatment. So, Jamie, let's move to progesterone, and
Hmm.
we really want to focus on progesterone. Like
Yeah.
again,
Yeah.
for as much love as we thought we just gave to estrogen, which we did,
We gave a
a
lot of
lot of
love to
love to
estrogen.
estrogen. And by the way, estrogen derived from the Greek word, which actually stands for to inspire.
Hmm.
I've just learned this, and it also means a producer of passion. So it
Oh,
came from a
okay.
Greek word.
Wow, they
So
were very wise.
yeah, so we gave a lot of love to estrogen, but we want to focus on progesterone because what we want people to know is that estrogen is kind of like the grower, it's proliferative. And so that is a beautiful thing. We need to grow. We need to grow a lot of things in our body, but we can't overgrow, right?
Right.
There is if you overgrow weeds, a problem. If you overgrow a bone, in your body, that's a problem. Like, so there is a process that needs kind of a balance, a check. We have
Yeah.
this a lot of systems. Progesterone checks the balances and it makes sure that estrogen does her job, but she doesn't go overboard. And it is the kind of anti-proliferative hormone, and it stops growth at some level. So for example, in the cycle, Jamie, an easy one.
Yeah.
Estrogen makes the cervix make cervical mucus.
Hmm.
Progesterone stops the production of cervical mucus.
Right.
Estrogen builds up the lining of the womb as you are approaching ovulation to start thickening it up. Progesterone will balance that and mature the lining and prevent it from getting too thick.
Hmm.
And it does that in menopause as well. So it is like we need progesterone as the all important sister to estrogen
Yeah.
to make sure they keep very much dancing in the right balance together.
Totally. It's like the sister. I love how you're talking about estrogen and progesterone as girls, like women,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're sisters. Because I think that puts a really funny, interesting image in my mind. And for better or worse, I don't know why, Teresa, but I thought about like the mall. The gal that's on like a shopping spree and she just keeps adding a bunch of stuff to the cart, But maybe at the checkout line, perhaps the progesterone cis is put them all back on the racks,
Yeah.
right? Don't you feel like that's a good image for that?
Oh, that
Uh,
is so good, Jamie. I love it.
yeah, that's a good way to think of it, Teresa, in terms of to just that the uterine lining, estrogen builds up the uterine lining. Progesterone matures it. It maintains the uterine lining, even with the cervical mucus. That's such a beautiful way to think of that. So, what are some other ways that progesterone keeps estrogen in check?
Yeah. Well, let's talk about with the bones,
Yeah.
like, okay, so I mentioned
Yeah.
there's these osteoblasts, which are the builders, and osteoclasts. Like progesterone keeps those two in balance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, it is the one that kind of comes in and helps the bottle fully mature, or the bones fully mature and remodel in a sense. So we need progesterone in our bone matrix.
Mm-hmm.
And we've given a lot of like love to estrogen in terms of supporting the bones, but progesterone has been underestimated as a bone protector, and new research is coming out that's showing that progesterone also in its natural form is very protective to the bones. So this is something I think we just need more research on,
Yeah.
and for research on progesterone only. There's been a lot of studies on estrogen, but less studies on progesterone,
Mm-hmm.
which is frustrating. But by the way, Jamie, this is another interesting fact, and this blows my mind, but like, again, there's crappy hormones from the old days that were synthetic, that came from horse urine, like equine horse urine, and then they made these crappy progestins that are not like our natural hormones.
Yeah.
And thankfully, like, many people are getting away from prescribing them, but the natural progesterone, the one that's available in every pharmacy, called oral micronized progesterone, otherwise known as the brand name Prometrium, wasn't available until 1998,
Oh my gosh.
which was when I was studying nursing.
Wow. Wow.
So the reality is, and I just think about this, is we have only been living with all of these kind of exogenous hormones for a short amount of time. So we're still really, really trying to get a handle on what do these hormones all do in their synthetic artificial form, in their natural form. But again, progesterone, very good for the bones, but I would love to talk about what it does for the immune system,
Yeah.
as well. What do you got?
Yeah. Okay. So because with our body wants to become pregnant every cycle, that's the main event is ovulation. We know that. So because of that, there needs to be an immune response. There needs to be an awareness by the immune system of what's also taking place within our fertility cycle. So it's interesting because our immune system needs to be less active so that sperm can enter and then combine, of course, that conception can take place, and so that the embryo will not be rejected and that the rest of the process can take place. But in terms of progesterone, now that we assume that that new baby has been implanted into the side of the uterus, now the job of the immune system is to make sure it still balances this sense of, okay, there's a baby, but I still need to protect what's going on. So what I find interesting is the immune system before ovulation, again, we're resilient, right? But we still need to be resilient, but then still, again, be receptive of the sperm so that conception can take place and implantation can take place. But then after ovulation, I've learned that if we're going to get sick, it's going to be after ovulation, which to me seems interesting because now we're pregnant. Wouldn't our body want to protect that baby? So I'm actually a little unclear on the immune system. I mean, I know that again, we're more resilient before and during ovulation, and then we're less so after, but it's hard for me to understand how that plays into conception, implantation, and growing that baby.
Yeah, I mean, well, it wouldn't be hard to believe, it would be hard to understand because there's like a cajillion different cells of the immune system. So,
Yeah.
I mean, at the simplest level, you could say that the progesterone modulates the immune system, that it regulates like things that are what we call cytokines, natural killer cells, which, they do attack things in the body that shouldn't be there.
Hmm.
Right. So, what we want to know is that progesterone is making sure that the body doesn't attack what it should not. And
Right.
this will go into, Jamie, progesterone's importance in protection of autoimmune disease,
Yeah.
and actually
Hmm.
why autoimmune diseases tend to get better in pregnancy because we have such high progesterone levels. But
Mm.
they're also finding it's so interesting to think about how autoimmune diseases have skyrocketed in the last 50 years.
Hmm.
And also what skyrocketed is infertility, endocrine system disorders. And again, what we're seeing is almost like the health of ovulation, the health of the menstrual cycle is changing. And could it be related to the lack of progesterone that's being produced in female bodies? Because we know that autoimmune diseases are overwhelmingly more common in women.
Women, yeah.
And so could it be that even if a woman's having periods, but she doesn't have normal progesterone levels, that her immune system is becoming dysregulated and that she's attacking her own body tissues? Things like thyroid disorder, Hashimoto's, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, mixed connective tissue disorders, scleroderma. There's all these autoimmune conditions that have kind of increased. And we're seeing that maybe progesterone and the lack of progesterone in the body could be related to this. Definitely an area where more research is needed. Progesterone in its beauty is one thing that it really does also, and this will tie to the immune system, is it regulates cortisol. Without progesterone and proper amounts of progesterone, our cortisol is not in a healthy place, which can lead to a lot of downstream effects. Healthy progesterone leads to healthy cortisol regulation, which we know that would lead to healthy blood sugars and healthy mood. So when we think about progesterone, we often, Jamie, talk about how calming it is, how it makes the brain feel relaxed. That's because of its influence on GABA receptors in the brain. And because of that, it is, it's going to make us feel calm and happy. And without progesterone, we could feel anxious and premenstrual symptom and PMDD and all these things. So progesterone makes the brain feel calm, and it's anti-inflammatory in the brain as well. In fact, they have done studies on women and men who have had brain trauma, traumatic brain injury, or TBI, and given them IV progesterone and reversed the traumatic brain injury.
What?
Yep. There's been lots of animal studies and at least some preliminary human studies that show that progesterone protects the brain after traumatic brain injury and reverses the inflammatory insult to the brain. And I actually met the doctor who pioneered that research. His name was Dr. Donald Stein, who was also considered, he was called the father of progesterone.
Wow.
Because progesterone was all he studied in terms of its neuroprotective effect in the brain. And I wonder if he's still alive. When I met him several years ago, he seemed like an older man. He worked out of Emory University, but did all of his incredible research on progesterone and its effect in the brain, which totally makes sense to me, and why, like, we use it in postpartum depression, Jamie, and it makes the brain almost just like take a deep, relaxing breath and just finally like relax. It's just amazing.
It's so cool. Two thoughts that came to mind, Teresa. For progesterone, because it's not this super complicated, in a sense, the way we would use it, medication, therapeutically, bioidentical hormone to get, to use, to have. I mean, is it possible that just taking progesterone, whether you know it's low or not, is going to have an ill effect? Is there an issue with that, Teresa? Because I'm sure as people are listening to this, they're like, well, how do I get my hands on progesterone? And we know there's different forms of progesterone women can try. You could try there's progesterone oil, there's progesterone cream, there's progesterone pills. There's Vitex that has been proven to naturally increase progesterone. There's intramuscular injections, there's suppositories, there's all these things. Teresa, what would you say to somebody who says, I just want to get my hands on progesterone? Is there a risk of taking too much progesterone? Let's say your levels are fine, but you take it anyway. What would somebody have to keep in mind before pursuing that, especially since you can buy some of these things online?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what I would say is, number one, if you don't understand the cycle,
Oh, yeah.
you don't understand ovulation, then you shouldn't be adding progesterone without your understanding of that. Because so many women, like, again, you're talking about like over the counter, like creams and things like that, and they're taking progesterone, but they're not even cooperating with the natural cycle.
Yep.
If you don't understand the cycle, don't be jumping out and grabbing progesterone.
Right.
Number two, there has been almost I think zero concerning side effects of bioidentical progesterone. Again, separate that from artificial progesterone, which is in birth control pills and some hormone replacement called medroxyprogesterone. But if we're just talking about bioidentical progesterone, there has been no concerning side effects, from a long-term perspective, from a short-term perspective. Now, there are people that don't feel perfect on natural progesterone. They might feel too sleepy, too tired on it, a little dizzy on it. So there are some side effects to progesterone,
Yeah.
but not like from a health perspective, nothing concerning. So I would tell a woman, could you do damage or hurt yourself by taking natural progesterone? No. But I also want women to understand the balance of their hormones. So I would encourage all people to, one, find a healthcare professional that knows how to test hormones and to appropriately cooperate with the body and to know whether you have a need for progesterone or not.
Yeah.
But I do think, Jamie, most people are in a situation to be much more likely to be progesterone deficient than not, right?
Totally.
Just in the environment we live in with the stress that we're under, which we talked about, stress depletes progesterone.
Yeah.
With all of that influencing the body, we are all more likely to have a problem with progesterone deficiency, not having a problem with too much progesterone.
Totally.
So, yeah.
I was meeting with a friend for tea, and she was just, struggling, and her chiropractor gave her progesterone. And, just knowing what I know, I was like, well, what'd she tell you to do with it? Oh, just put some on every day. Just put a little bit some on every day. It's this progesterone cream. I'm like, seriously? No. Either it's doing nothing for you, maybe it's just not as bioavailable as progesterone that you could be taking. And secondly, you don't put progesterone on every day. You don't use progesterone every day. And it's because what Teresa's talking about is it's after ovulation that progesterone is produced. It's produced from the corpus luteum. So if we're putting progesterone on before we ovulate or taking progesterone willy-nilly, not knowing when we should be taking it, it could impede ovulation because your body believes that you've already ovulated. Progesterone is the dominant hormone after ovulation. So if your brain is picking up on the progesterone, it's going to think you ovulated already, so you're not going to ovulate. And that's also how like the mini pill and the combination pill work. It assumes that ovulation has taken place because that's when progesterone, but in birth control it's progestin. That's when it's high. But let's talk about estrogen dominance, Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned how we're all stressed, and it's true. Our environmental factors, not just emotional stress, which is 100% correct, but also just the stress of dealing with toxins and inflammation and maybe lack of sleep. So our body is in a state of stress. So because of that, when we have too little progesterone, and again, progesterone's the dominant hormone after ovulation, but we also know you started off the episode saying we have estrogen throughout our whole cycle. It's the dominant hormone before ovulation, leading up to it, but it's still there, and it should be after ovulation. So, how do women strike that balance if we're starting to feel PMSy, but perhaps we're dealing with some estrogen dominance, which means there's more estrogen or it's higher in terms of the ratio than it should be in relationship to the progesterone? Let's kind of talk about how you manage that with your patients and how it manifests if we're estrogen dominant.
Yeah, so there's two ways to be estrogen dominant. So let's just first say that.
Yeah.
One is due to complete lack of making progesterone. So that could be like PCOS, because you don't ovulate, you're not making progesterone at all. Therefore, just by the nature of the absence of progesterone, you are estrogen dominant to some degree because progesterone went missing, because ovulation went missing. And then there's people who ovulate and may have higher estrogen levels in comparison to their progesterone levels or a deficiency in progesterone. And how we manage that is we correct for the progesterone deficiency first and foremost, because that will help to balance the estrogen. So if you correct the progesterone deficiency, that is going to kind of like, in a sense, like we talked about, kind of it's a check and balance. So it's going to put that estrogen a little bit back in its place. But it also helps with the cortisol, which again is related to the estrogen dominance in that situation. So it also helps with thyroid function. So progesterone helps our body take that T4 and convert it to T3. So if you have better thyroid function, you're going to have a better balance of your estrogen and progesterone as well. But Jamie, that estrogen dominance isn't easy because outside of correcting for the progesterone, like you can't just completely just get rid of the estrogen easily. And that's where it's going to go into lifestyle management, supplements, looking at your gut, your liver, and making sure you're eliminating excess estrogen. And there's a variety of different things you can do to do that. But again, it's always good to balance that progesterone and make sure, if I think about it as buckets, like that your bucket of estrogen is equal to your bucket of progesterone in a sense. From a cycle standpoint, they have estrogen again is kind of one side of the bucket, progesterone's on the other side. Like they should, in the end, no matter what, when a cycle is complete, be equal. I mean, they're not equal in terms of numbers, but equal in what they're doing for the body.
It just shows how incredible, again, like you're saying, the hormone symphony is. Even though our hormones have what I like to think of as certain personality traits, because one thing leads into the other and there is a cascade effect, and we're constantly different every single day as women. And again, we're different because the day before happened and the day before that happened, and it's all specific to the day before, and the week before. I always like to think about our cycle as a diary from the cycle before. It's always about what was before. So as you were answering that question, I was just thinking how cool it is that our body is so intelligent that it knows progesterone needs to be dominant, that we're not going to feel right potentially if it's not. Even though before ovulation, if our estrogen levels are high, we're going to feel great. But if our estrogen levels are high after ovulation, we don't. It's because our body's very intelligent. It knows what it needs. And when it's out of balance, we feel it. So we're in balance when our estrogen's high before ovulation. We're out of balance when estrogen is high after ovulation. It's because our body is very smart. It knows what it needs. And it's not an isolated event. There are many things at play. Yeah. So I just think it's just incredible how our body is made.
All right. Well, Jamie, we talked about ovulation as a sign of health for women. I think you brought up a point that we hadn't talked about, but if you're not keeping a diary of your cycle or tracking your cycle, that's the first step. How do you know if you're ovulating naturally? You are tracking your cycle and you're tracking the biomarkers of your cycle to be able to document that you have an ovulatory cycle. So that's the first step always, because that is the diary of your health. That is the way to be able to be in relationship with your body and have body literacy. We talked about estrogen and progesterone needing to be in balance and how protective they are to multiple systems of the body, including the heart, the brain, the muscle, the bone. To so many areas. We could have gone on to skin and just so many different areas, but what we want you to know is natural ovulation is a sign of health to women, and we want you to be interested in that and listen to previous episodes about the main event, ovulation, and why it can continue to make you healthy as a woman.
Thanks for listening to the Hormone Genius Podcast. Please remember to share our podcast with your friends and family, and also follow us on social media. If you were not aware, we have a YouTube channel. So if you could like and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, we would appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support. We are excited to journey alongside you as you discover the beauty and the genius of your hormones.